All right. My name is Howard Ebert. I am an alcoholic. I want to welcome everyone to week number 40 of the Big Book Comes Alive Step Study Workshop. This is the 40th. I think we're in the sixth cycle on Zoom. I sat down a week or two ago to come up with the date for when we actually started. And I placed it around 16 or 17 years ago. So we've been doing this Sunday night meeting at 5 o'clock, 5:30, or 7 for the last 16 years, nonstop, through Zoom, through COVID, through everything. We've been here at this time for a lot of years. It was in Seymour, Connecticut, or Beacon Falls, Connecticut, and now we're universal. We're everywhere. We're like AT&T. We're everywhere. Um, but where we are is in chapter 6. Excuse me. We have talked about the problem. We've diagnosed the problem in the earlier chapters, that we have this threefold malady made up of a physical allergy, a mental obsession, and a spiritual malady. And it starts with this spiritual malady where we are restless and irritable and discontented. And for me, that is an understatement. I was a raw nerve. Everything hurt. I was hypersensitive, overly critical, brutally sarcastic. I was miserable. I was not a pleasant person to be around, both for myself and for you people. And I eventually convinced myself that the ease and comfort, the sense of ease and comfort that comes from that first drink of that first drug will solve my problems, even though I know what happens every time I take that line, that hit, that drink. I eventually can convince myself of a lie. And the lie is that this time it will be different. This time I will stop at two or three or just this or just that. Whatever excuse I tell myself that justifies taking that first drink that I know triggers the allergic reaction. And the allergic reaction is basically an abnormal reaction. That's what an allergy is, an abnormal reaction to any food, substance, or chemical. And unlike some allergies like hay fever or ragweed or cat dander, I have all of those. I When I'm around those things, I sneeze, I sniffle, I wheeze, I tear, but you could see those things. My reaction to the ingestion of alcohol and these other chemicals, you can't really see the same way. It's something you have to experience. Try and explain craving to somebody who's never experienced it. I don't think you can adequately do that justice. And that's what we have. We have this threefold malady. And our problem is that we are powerless over it, that we cannot fix ourselves, that a sick mind cannot heal a sick mind, that we are in need of a power greater than ourselves that can do for us what we couldn't do for ourselves. The same way the chemicals, the drugs, the alcohol did for us what we wanted for myself. It made me everything I ever wanted to be, but couldn't be with that first hit, with that first drink. That's it. That's what that did. And I'm powerless over that. I cannot fix that myself. That power, that negative, destructive power, was ruining my life, and now I have to find this other power, this providential, beneficial power that is greater than I, that can do for me what I could never do for myself in a beneficial way. And we recognize that that power had to be providential in nature. It can't be a doorknob. It can't be a light bulb. It has to be something that can effectively, realistically be relied upon to get between me and that first drink or that first drug. Now, I'm sorry, doorknob, not going to do it. Doorknobs fall off, light bulbs fail and break. They're not going to get between me and that first drink. I am in need of a power greater than myself. And the second step tells me that. And so, knowing that, understanding the problem in one, and understanding the nature of the solution, step two, In step 3, I make a decision to pursue that power. That if that power can help me, can do for me what you say it can do for me, I'm going to find it. I'm going to try and hook up with that power. And I'm thinking it's out here. And we've learned that it's really not out here, that we don't go to let God in. What we try and do is let God out by clearing away the clutter that's accumulated over our soul, over a lifetime of rationalizing and justifying our behavior. Once we identify those things that have been blocking us, we clear those things away. And that's what we did in the 4th step. We looked at the things that have been ruling, controlling, and dominating us adversely up until this point. So we can let that power at God out, because God is innate. On page 55, we're told that deep down inside every man, woman, and child is this fundamental concept. Call it innate intelligence, call it a gut feeling, call it a conscience, but whatever you want to call it, it is God. And we have to clear away the things that are blocking him or her from getting out. And in our 4th step, we took a look at those things. And I realized that I've never had a single emotional disturbance in my life that wasn't caused by one of 3, or maybe all of the following 3 things. I'm angry as hell about something. I'm scared to death about something, or I've done something I don't want you to know about, and I'm filled with guilt and shame because I'm convinced you know or will find out about it. And if that's the case, then my life has been ruled, controlled, and dominated by those angers, those fears, and those sources of guilt and shame that I've been carrying around. And in our 4th step, we took a look at those things and we got them down on paper. We got down to the causes and conditions that caused us to take the actions that we did. You know, we're told early in the book that we're driven by 100 forms of fear and self this and self that and self the other thing. But we really weren't able to really pin down, what is that? How does that look? What does that show up as? You tell me I'm governed by selfish self-centeredness, but what does it look like? Well, in our 4th step, we see that it looks like being frightened, being governed by fear, inconsideration, irresponsibility, dishonesty, selfishness, self-centeredness, judgmental. When I made decisions based on those defective thoughts, those manifestations of self, I was in collision spiritually, mentally, physically, with everybody and everything. Because the problem with self-will is everyone's got it. And if I try and put my will on you, you're going to resist. See, you got your own playbook. You want things to be your way. So when I try and force my will on you, when I step on your toes, what do? You push back. Get off my foot. I want to do it my way. So when those 2 immovable forces collide, what happens? You retaliate by pushing me off, and I retaliate by getting angry, by getting fearful, by acting in a harmful manner. I get resentful. And when I'm resentful, I drink and I drug. My history has proven that to me. So if the action of drinking and drugging is what I need to eliminate from my life, I have to first identify those thoughts that set in motion that chain of events that cause me to step on your toes, that cause you to retaliate and push back, that cause me to get angry and so on. And I've identified those things in our 4th step. And now in our 5th step, we're approaching having to share those with God, with ourselves, and with other human beings, with our sponsor. We are on page 72. Are we? Yeah, 72. On page 72, into action. Not into thinking, not into feeling, into action. You know, the first three steps really were conclusions of the mind. We came to the conclusion of what the nature of the problem was. I'll see you later, hon. What the nature of the solution was in step two. And in step three, we made a decision, a conclusion of the mind to pursue that power. And in step four, we made a list of those things that had been ruling, controlling, and dominating us. But we haven't actually done anything. We've done some thinking, we've done some writing, but now we're into action. And that's the name of this chapter, is Into Action. And let me begin, as I said, on page 72, paragraph 1. We're going to begin this paragraph, this chapter, by answering a couple of questions. In the first part, we're going to ask, what are we trying to do? What exactly are we trying to do? And we're going to answer that in the first paragraph. But also, as we go through the first paragraph, I'd like you to take note, and I will pinpoint these instances where Bill points out the 6 things that will have happened if we took the steps up until this point out of the big book. He's going to tell us what it is that we've done up until this point. So he says, having made our personal inventory, notice it's made, it's in the past. Everything in this book is based on our being told to do something that was set up by what we did beforehand. So if I'm at this point in the book and I haven't made my personal inventory, I've got to stop. And I've got to go back to the last chapter and maybe even further than that to take that inventory, because none of this is going to make any sense. None of this is going to have any point unless we've done the work that led up to it. Every step is based on the assumption that we've done the work prior to that. We've worked the steps up until that point. It's not an academic inquiry. It's an actual action. So we've made, past tense, our personal inventory. Step 4. What do we do about it? I got a whole lot of paper written out. I got a whole lot of things about myself. Well, what do I do about it? Well, I'm going to suggest that you highlight this next sentence. We have been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator, and discover the obstacles in our path. Whoa, there's so much there. Let me slow it down a bit. We've been trying to get, please underline new attitude. That's number 1. That's one of the 6 things that will have happened if we've done the work up until this point. We have adopted a new attitude. Step 2, incidentally, would refer to that. Number 2, we have a new relationship with our Creator, which very much could be step 3. So these are 2 of the things that have happened because we have made our personal inventory prior to this. We've done the work in the previous 70 some odd pages, and now we have a new attitude and we have a new relationship with our Creator. And here's number 3, to discover the obstacles in our path. The obstacles in our path are step 4 resentments, our angers, our fears, and our sources of guilt and shame as a result of the harms that we've done others. So those are the obstacles in our path. So that is number 3, discover the obstacles in our path. Step 4 resentment list. We have admitted certain defects. There's number 4, admitted certain defects. What are they? The final column. In the anger list, it's that 4th column. In the sex harms, it's that 5th column. It's that list of defects, those wrongs we're going to talk about in step 5, those shortcomings we're going to talk about in step 7, those defects we're going to talk about in step 6. Those are the things we're talking about. Those are those are the things that have those certain defects that we have admitted to. And we have ascertained in a rough way, and here's number 5, ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. That final column. The problem is that I am frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-centered, judgmental. And when I made decisions based on those things, here we go again. I was in collision with the forces around me. I was spiritually, mentally, physically in conflict. I stepped on the toes of those people around me who had their own playbook. They retaliated, they pushed back, and I got angry and fearful and so on. So I set that in motion. Those defects are the problems. That's what the trouble is. And I love the fact that he says we ascertained in a rough way, because there's no such thing as a perfect 4th step. There's always more. There's always something else. It's being raised by a Jewish mother, that's not unusual. Jewish mothers are all about, it's always something else. There's always one more thing you got to do. It's always great, but come tatala, you do one more thing, it'll be great. Always one more thing. So in any case, number 5 is we have ascertained in a rough way what the trouble is. Number 6, we have put our finger on the weak items in our personal inventory. Those weak items are those resentments, those angers, those fears, those sources of guilt and shame and harm. Now, when you're in the line at the bank and the teller says, now, step up, what do? You step up right now, not in 10 minutes, right now. So here's our direction. Now, these are about to be cast out. Please highlight that. These are about to be cast out. We're throwing it out with force. He doesn't say they're about to be discarded. When you cast something out, it's done with force. So we are casting out these things. This requires action on our part. Please highlight that. One of the things we like to do in this workshop is point out all of the musts that are not in the book. As our friend Paige says, it's a very musty book. There's a lot of must all through the book. And sometimes those musts appear in another way other than M-U-S-T. And here's one of them. We require. This requires action. Require is a must. And we highlight the musts in green. And I'm sure Anita or someone is putting in the chat the color codes that we use for the highlighters. And I know it's really anal and it's just pedantic as hell. But there's a point. If I want to look for all the musts in the book, all I have to do is thumb through the book and look for all of the green highlighters, and I'll find them. If I want to find all of the promises and the prayers in the book, I'll thumb through it and look for all of the pink highlighters and so on. We have other codes that we use. Orange is for recovered and blue is for approached and so on. But if I want to find those things, it's much easier to find them by thumbing through the book and looking for the colors than it is 1 page, 2 page, 3 page. That takes forever. So highlight it, makes it easier to find. Okay, so let's continue. Now, this is telling us, when do we start our 5th step? Bill always does that on every step. He tells us, when do we start it? And it's always now, next, right away. The only time we get kind of a break, and we don't even get that much, is between the 5th and the 6th step, where we're told we have an hour, but we're being given an assignment in that hour. So it's not really an hour to kick back and turn on HBO and catch up on Game of Thrones. Nope. God has given us an assignment. Like I said, God is the greatest Jewish mother in the world. It's always one more thing you got to do. So This requires action on our part. Again, this tells us when we're supposed to start the fifth step, and it's now, after the fourth step. This requires action on our part, which, when completed, will mean that we have admitted to God. Please underline God. And that is the spiritual dimension. And we do that through the exercise of prayer. We're going to break down these three elements of the fifth step here: God, ourselves, and others. But we're going to kind of explain how we do it and what they represent. So admitting it to God deals with the spiritual nature of our malady, and we do that through prayer. And then it says to ourselves, and that deals with the mental dimension of our malady, and we do that by facing these things in us that have been the nature of our problem. We fearlessly face those things. And then we admit it to another human being. That deals with the physical aspect of our malady. And we do that through the action of sharing. So in our fifth step, we admit to God through prayer, to ourselves by facing these things, and to God and to another human being by sharing these things. We deal with the three basic dimensions of our disease. It is the first step where we start to bring those three things together. We've mentioned them almost since page 1, that this is a threefold malady. Well, now we're about to bring those three things together. Maybe it makes a little bit more, will make a little bit more sense after this. So he says, and to another human being, the exact nature of our defects. Anyone notice? The step says we admitted our wrongs. In the narrative here, he says defects. In the sixth step, he uses another word. He says shortcomings. He says defects. In the seventh step, he uses another word, shortcomings. And when Bill was asked, what's the difference here between a wrong in 5 and a defect and a shortcomings? What's the difference between these things? There has to be some delineation here. And I've been to meetings and I've heard people bloviate for 20 minutes on the difference between those three things. And the fact of the matter is, if you ask the man who wrote those three things, Bill Wilson, he said there was no difference. They all mean the same thing. He said that in basic compositional English, I learned to try and find other words to say things, that to repeat something over and over and over again, it demonstrates a lack of intelligence. And Bill said, I like people to think I'm a pretty smart guy. So I try and use different words to say the same things, because when you repeat something over and over, it's not a lot. It doesn't make you sound like a smart person. You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Huh? You know, like, huh? You know what I mean? You know what I mean? Huh? Yeah. You know what I mean? I can go on for an hour like that and annoy the shit out of everybody, but that's what we're talking about. Repeating something over and over is a lack of, demonstrates a lack of intelligence. So in any case, he says, this brings us to the fifth step. He said the nature of our defects. In the step, he said wrongs, same thing. This brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the previous chapters. Now I want to go back a bit. I want to talk about the first 3 or 4 lines. I got some sounds coming in here, so if you don't mind, I'm going to mute everyone again. Okay. Second and third line says, we've been trying to get a new attitude, a new relationship with our Creator. Well, what exactly does that mean? Anyone ever think about that? Well, Bill, what do you mean by a new attitude? What do you mean by a new relationship? You say these things and you write these things and leave it for us to figure out. But what exactly does it mean? Well, back in chapter 2, we're directed to read the spiritual experience appendix. And in that section, we're told that a spiritual experience and a spiritual awakening mean the same thing, mean the same thing. But what they mean is a personality change sufficient to bring about recovery from a hopeless state of mind and body. A personality change. And when we read that section, as I always do, I like to look things up and find out what these words mean. So I looked up, what does personality mean? If it means it's a personality change, well, what is it that changes? Well, a personality is defined as the way we think, the way we feel, our outlook and attitude on life, people, and so on. The key word there being attitude. Once I saw that in a dictionary, I knew I was on the right track. So a spiritual awakening then, in other words, brings about a new way of viewing things, a new way of viewing life, of viewing people. In other words, it brings about a new attitude. So when he says we've been trying to get a new attitude, that's what we're talking about. We are doing all of this work so we can, by the time we get to the first part of the 12th step, which has 3 parts, the first part of the 12th step is the promise. A personality change as a result of these steps, the result of these steps. That's our new attitude. So a spiritual awakening brings about a new way of looking at things. It brings about a new attitude. So when we say we've been trying to get a new attitude, we've been working towards this spiritual awakening, this spiritual experience. So what really is that new attitude? How does it manifest itself? What does it look like? Well, hopefully we've begun by this point to see that others who have harmed us are sick in self too. And if we can do that, if we can really start to appreciate that the people who harmed us were sick in self too, then we can start to maybe begin to feel like we're not under constant attack. That those people who hurt us, we're not doing it to us. They were just doing it. It becomes less personal. They're acting out, not attacking me. I begin to realize that my problems aren't coming at me. They're coming from me. I believe that we're all on this planet to grow in communion and understanding with our Creator. And that being said, some of us are just a little bit further along on that journey than others. And if we could begin to look upon those who hurt us as just not being where we are spiritually, then maybe we can start to view them with compassion and patience and tolerance rather than bitter resentment and hatred. So having completed this 4th step, this searching and fearless moral inventory that's called for in the 4th step, we've begun the process of developing this new relationship. We've kind of defined a new attitude, but now we're talking about a new relationship with our Creator. So what are specific examples that we've already had up until this point of this new attitude to our new relationship with our Creator? He's the director, He's the Father. How has that shown up in our life? Well, in dealing with angers, We are trying to look at those people who harmed us as being spiritually ill. That is a new attitude. Tolerance, patience, compassion beats bitter hatred and resentment 8 days a week. So that's a new attitude we've been trying to get through angers and through fears. In dealing with fears, rather, we try to see that the reason for our fears is that we feel that we only have ourselves to rely upon, that we don't make use of this infinite power that we have tapped into. We are reliant entirely on the finite, the limited powers of self, that I only have me to solve these problems, that I never reached out and asked God to help me with these situations. That is a new attitude. And in dealing with sex problems and other harms, we try to realize that selfishness is the cause of those sex problems. And we're also being told to begin the process of developing those new attitudes by doing certain things. Now, we've developed this attitude in angers that these people are spiritually ill, and dealing with fears that we're reliant upon self, not infinite God. Well, how have we gotten that? What is the process that has given us the ability to have that new attitude? Well, if you noticed, in each of the 4 resentment areas, and actually we've only dealt with 3 so far. The 4th one is harms, and we'll deal with that later. But in each of these items on our 4th step list, we have been given specific prayers. We're being told how to deal with these things through prayer, through reliance upon a power so much greater than ourselves, infinite in nature, rather than our finite selves. And so in dealing with anger, Bill said, we prayed to be released from the control that our anger has over us. And the words he gave us were, we ask God to help us show them the same. Does this sound familiar, incidentally? The sick man's prayer. That's what we're talking about on page 67, the so-called sick man's prayer. In dealing with angers, we ask God to show them the same tolerance, pity, patience we would cheerfully grant a sick friend. When a person offended, when you pissed me off, we said to ourselves, this is a sick man. How can I be helpful to him? God save me from being angry, not getting angry. We're going to get angry. We're human beings. But I am not being angry. Being angry is a state of mind. It's the way I thought and acted 24/7. So God save me from being angry. Thy will be done. Because I don't believe God wants me to be angry all the time. So to outgrow our fears, when it came to fears, he gives us another prayer. He said, we ask God to remove our fear of whatever it is, of making the call to the girl for the date, or making a call you don't want to make to somebody you have to apologize for, whatever it is that we're afraid of doing. We ask God to remove our fear and direct our attention to what he would have us be. And if you recall, when we were dealing with fears, we talked about what God would have us be is courageous at all times. See, the opposite of fear is not faith. The opposite of fear is courage. And by exercising courage through reliant upon this power greater than ourselves over a period of time, that courage becomes faith. Doesn't start that way. It actually starts with belief. But based on that, it turns into faith. through reliance upon God and demonstrating courage. And in dealing with our sex problems, I haven't forgotten about the third one. I mentioned there are the three things that we were dealing with up until now. And in dealing with the sex problems, he gave us another prayer. He said on page 69, I love that. All of the stuff on sex in this book is on page 69. I don't know. Is it just me? Am I that twisted, or is there really something to that? In any case, he told us on page 69 that we ask God to mold our ideals and help us to live up to them, and to show us what to do when confronted with a dilemma in this regard. He tells us he says to ask God what we should do about each specific matter. These prayers, these practical prayers, result in our having this new attitude towards our Creator. And they're the beginning of this new relationship that we're going to have with our Creator. That's what we're talking about when we say we have a new attitude and a new relationship. Maybe that makes it a little bit clearer. It did for me when I looked at it that way. But let's get back to the book. Second paragraph. After we said this brings us to the fifth step in the program of recovery mentioned in the previous chapter. This is perhaps difficult. At every step, he knows us so well. He's one step ahead all the time. Sometimes he says, at some of these we balked. At another time he says, what an order. I can't go through with it. When we were talking about there being an answer, I'm losing my train of thought. He tells us none of us like to do these things that we had to do to find this solution. On page 25, there is a solution. And then before he tells us what the solution is, he prefaces it by again saying, I know you don't want to do this shit. You don't want to do it. I get it. You don't want to do it. At some of these we balked. Here he's saying, I know. My Jewish mother, I know, Tatala, I know it's difficult, but we still have to do it. You want to get better? Come, have that chicken soup. You'll be fine. So in any case, seriousness, Bill is telling us that he knows it's difficult. We think we've done well enough in admitting these things, and please underline these things. And above that, let's write defects. These things, defects, the final column. Column 4 in angers, column 5 in sex harms, the being frightened, irresponsible, inconsiderate, dishonest, selfish, self-seeking, judgmental. That these are the things we're talking about. So that in admitting these things, he said, we've done well enough. We've done a pretty good job of doing that. Right? Again, Jewish mother, they do such a good job. It's so good job, Tatala. But, and here it is, there is doubt about that. So you think you've done a good job? I'm telling you, you've done a good job. Don't get so cocky. Maybe you could do a little bit better. And that's what he's saying. He says, there is doubt about that. In actual practice, and please highlight this, we usually find a solitary self-appraisal insufficient. Knowing the problem isn't solving the problem. We usually find a solitary self-appraisal, because that's what our fourth step has been, a solitary self-appraisal. Even if we've had participation and advice and direction from our sponsor, it's still a solitary self-appraisal. We've done, I think for the most part, we've done the best we could with our lists up until this point, in our fourth step list. But I now need God and another human being to look at me objectively and to help me see the things in me that I cannot or will not see. You see, it's easy for me to look at you and tell your defects, right? There's nothing between us but air. Very easy for me to see your defects. I'm sure it's just as easy for you to see mine. But there's nothing, and that's because there's nothing between us but air. However, it's very difficult for me to look at me and see the truth about my defects of character because of a lifetime spent rationalizing and justifying my behavior, justifying my attitudes. So a solitary self-appraisal is insufficient because I've spent my life rationalizing and justifying my behaviors. So I can't see it, honestly, I can't see it objectively. I need somebody outside of myself who has walked this path before me. And that's critical because if all I do is talk to somebody about these things and they just, hmm, oh yeah, that's interesting. All I'm going to get is affirmation, maybe. I'm certainly not going to get any help, any directions. From that, for that, I need someone who has walked this path before me, who knows that the information that's being extracted from me in doing the fifth step, which is reviewing my fourth step, is going to provide me with the information, the basis, the criteria that I'm going to need in step 6, 7, 8, 9. So you see, if you've burned your fourth step, kind of in a real bad place now, which is why I suggested if you're going to burn it for some ceremonial reason, make a copy. Because Bill told us already that these lists are the basis that we're going to use for the rest of our lives. So if we burn it, how are we going to make use of it? How are we going to know the names to use in steps 8 and 9 if we've burnt the list and we don't have access to column 1? How are we going to know the defects that have come out unless we have the sheets in front of us that tells us that column 4 and column 5 material? So we don't burn those things, but getting back to a solitary self-appraisal, many of us thought it necessary to go much further. We will be more reconciled, meaning in agreement. We'll be more in agreement to discussing ourselves with another person when we see good reason why we should do so, right? Bill's a good teacher. He doesn't just tell us we need to do something. He tells us why. Most of the time, in one way or another. But he says here, we'll be more reconciled in discussing it with another human being when we see good reasons why we should do so. The best reason first. Let you in on a little secret. There's no second reason. He says, I'm going to give you the best reason first. And that's as far as he goes. There's no second, there's no third, and there's no fourth. And when you hear what the first reason is, I think you'll agree there's no reason for a second, a third, or a fourth. Because he says the best reason first. If we skip, and please highlight this sentence, if we skip this vital step, remember we've defined vital as life-supporting, life-giving. Our heart is a life-supporting organ. A lung is not. I could survive with one lung. Um, I've lived most of my life as if my brain weren't a vital organ because I didn't use it that much, but technically a brain is a vital organ. So he's saying if we skip this vital step, this life-supporting, life-saving step, we may not overcome drinking. That's one hell of a warning. Now, that's what he says is the first reason. If we skip this fifth step, if we don't do this, if we don't share this with God and with another human being, we may not overcome drinking. And it's a vital step for us because overcoming drinking is vital, is life supporting. If we can't do that, we cannot recover. So you see, there's really no reason for a second or a third or a fourth reason. Is the first reason. If you don't, it'll kill you. Need say more? Next. Let's just move on. Time after time, newcomers, and you may want to add after newcomers the word and beginners. Anybody, I don't care how long you've been around. I was around these rooms 24 years. I didn't consider myself a beginner, but I was because I was around these rooms 24 years and never did any of the work. I was around the room. I wasn't in the work. So anybody who hasn't done the work to me is a beginner, is a newcomer. I know, we've been here a while. You don't like to be called that. But if you've been coming around for a lot of years and you don't know what's in this book and you're not teaching people what's in this book and you're not sponsoring people through this book, then you're a newcomer. Then you're a beginner. Many of us thought it necessary to go much further. Oh, I'm sorry, I said that already. Time after time, newcomers have tried to keep to ourselves certain facts about our lives, trying to avoid this humbling experience. You may want to highlight that humbling experience. When I first read that, I thought humiliating experience. That's what the fifth step is. It's meant to humiliate me, to embarrass me, to break me down so that you can rebuild me. I heard about all of these things in rehabs and stuff where they tear you down so they can rebuild the personality. So it's not that. It's not a humiliating experience. It's a humbling experience. And if we define humble, it's defined as recognition of one's shortcomings. That's all. Recognition of our shortcomings, of our defects. What are they? Not humiliating, just the truth. Trying to avoid this humbling experience, they have turned to easier methods. Remember I said in the beginning on the first chapter that Bill is going to start out by telling us what is it we're trying to do? This new attitude, this new relationship. Now he's going to tell us why we're doing it. That trying to avoid this experience, they've turned to humbler methods. Please highlight this in pink. This is a promise. Almost invariably, they got drunk. Going through our fifth step, sharing it with somebody else, is not about just getting stuff off our chest. Herbert Spencer, who most of us are familiar with because he's given credit for the quote at the end of Spiritual Experience Appendix about knowledge without information without knowledge and so on. And we know that that's not actually attributed to Herbert Spencer. Somebody else actually said it. But in our book, it does say Herbert Spencer. The quote I'm going to give you now actually is a quote from Herbert Spencer, and it concerns what we're talking about. He says, the great aim of education is not knowledge. And that's what we're doing in this fourth and fifth step process, sixth and seventh, and so on. The game, this is education, is not knowledge. The great aim of education is action. That just knowing, like I said earlier, knowing what the problem is in step one isn't going to tell us how to solve the problem. So the great aim of education is not knowledge, but the great aim of education is action. Taking action on the information that we've gathered. So we've highlighted almost invariably they got drunk. That's in pink because it's a promise. And whenever it comes to a particular part of the book that is particularly significant to me, I personalize it, which means this paragraph we're about to read, I've changed all the we's to I's. If you've heard Mark Houston, the late, great Mark Houston, he said from time to time that in his book, he personalized it by not putting the words I in. Instead of the word we, he wrote down Mark. He wrote his name down. The reason is the same. I write down I instead of we, and he writes Mark instead of we. So we don't confuse who is being spoken about. We want to drive home the fact that Bill is referring to me, not to somebody else. If I read saying we, I could convince myself that it's not so much me, it's more you. That's what me is, more you than me. But if I say Howard, or if I say Mark, or if I say I, there's no escaping who we're talking about. So in my book, the sentence we just read says almost invariably, I got drunk. Having persevered with the rest of the program, in other words, we need to work all of the steps in the order in which they're written. That's what he's talking about here. Having persevered with the rest of the program, I wondered why I relapsed. Right? Now, in my case, persevering with the rest of the program looked more like picking and choosing which steps I wanted to work. Remember, this is a suggested program, not a program of suggestions, that each step depends and builds upon the following, the step before it, and lays the groundwork for the steps that come after it. So I can't pick and choose. I have to work the steps in the order they're in for a reason, because each step sets the groundwork for the next step, and it gives us information for the following steps. So I can't pick and choose. This is not a buffet. So having persevered with the rest of the program, I wondered why I relapsed, because I thought I worked those programs. I worked steps 1, 2, and 3 over and over and over. I didn't think I need to work a fourth step because I always bloviated at meetings. That may be hard to believe, but I did. So I didn't need to do this inventory because I was always blabbering about myself at meetings anyway. I didn't need to work an eighth or a ninth step because I didn't hurt anybody. So what do I need to make amends for? So my steps looked like 1, 2, 3, 12. That's how I persevered with the rest of the steps. Then I wondered, why did I relapse twice over 10 years? Why did I accumulate 10 years of clean time twice? I wondered why, because I thought I persevered. I'm going to suggest you you may want to highlight the rest of the paragraph. Keep it simple, so we don't have to keep starting and stopping. We think the reason is we never completed their housekeeping. Now, in my book, as I said, it says, I think the reason is I never completed my house cleaning. I never did. I took inventory all right, but hung on to some of the worst items in stock. I heard my friend, I know Bruce is here. I heard my friend Bruce and his partner, Rob, California Rob, at this point in the book, use the term iceberg honesty. You know what iceberg honesty is? You can see 10 or 15% of the iceberg above the surface. And that's the stuff we talk about. We don't talk about the 80 some odd percent that's unseen, that's under the surface. That is the real dangerous part of the iceberg. It's what sunk the Titanic, not the visible part, the invisible part, the unseen part. And that's how we practice honesty to a great extent, this iceberg honesty. We'll share this stuff, but oh no, I ain't getting into that. And we'll talk about that again in a moment. They took inventory, all right, but hung on to some of the worst things in stock. I only thought I lost my egoism and fear. I only thought I humbled myself. But I had not learned enough of humility. And again, humility is not embarrassment, it's not humiliation. Humility is just recognition of one's shortcomings. That's all. Learning the truth, not deceiving myself about who I am and what I do and why I do it. I haven't learned enough of humility, fearlessness, and honesty in the sense I find it necessary. I've circled necessary in green because I think it's a must. If something is necessary, then I must do it. Until I found it necessary, until I told someone all my life story, squiggly letters for all must be important. I have to tell everyone, I have to tell my partner, my fifth step partner, my sponsor, all of my life story as it's told in those inventories. This is not a biography. I was born on a cold summer night in July of 1952 in the Brooklyn Jewish Hospital to parents. No, don't need that shit. Not interested in that. We want your whole life story if it somehow has to do with this information in that inventory. So if somehow the weather and the location when I was born, if that becomes relevant, if it somehow manifests itself in my inventory, then we talk about it. If we don't, it's irrelevant. It's just wasted time and effort. So we tell everyone all our life story through those sheets that we hopefully haven't burned, through those inventories. More, I think let me get off on a tangent here. I hope I don't get too far off. You ask most people to talk about the three elements of this disease. We have a spiritual malady. I'm sorry, we have a physical allergy, a mental obsession, and a spiritual malady. And most people will tell you, well, if you want to learn about the allergy, read the doctor's opinion in page 20 and 21. You want to read about the obsession. There's plenty of information about that in the other chapters. They can turn to those pages real fast when you ask someone, show me, tell me about the obsession. Show me, tell me about the allergy. What about the spiritual malady? I tell you, somebody, tell me about it. Show me, where does it say the spiritual malady in the book? I had a conversation with somebody like that at the beginning of the week. And the only example he was able to come up with, and again, it wasn't a challenging conversation. It just, we were talking about how odd it is that is one thing that we really don't right away come to mind about. The thing that we always say, page 52, right? What's the spiritual malady? 52. It's the knee-jerk reaction. But it's also in other places. It's not just in the page 52. You'll also find it in a description of selfish self-centeredness on page 61 and 62. And you're about to hear about it on page 63, because on 61, it tells us that we're like the actor who wants to run the whole show. But that's not the end of it. We want more than running the whole show. We want to control the outcome. We want to control what you think and how you think of us. So I will adopt whatever personality I need to adopt. I'm a chameleon. I could be anyone, anything I need to be to convince you of something. I always believed, most of my addiction, I always believed, uh, rightly or wrongly, that I could convince you to do just about anything, given enough time and information. And let me try on enough costumes in the trunk. I can get you to do just about anything. So it's not just the stage actor who wants you, who wants to control the lights, the camera, and so on. Let's see what he says here on page 73. More than most people, the actor leads a double life. You may want to underline that. More than most people, the actor leads a double life. And you may want to ask yourself, when I go through this with my sponsees, we do stop at this point, and I ask them, just kind of, does that statement describe you in recovery? Can that be applied to the way you go about in your recovery? Do you tell your story or somebody else's? Oh, I like his story. It's better than mine. His story is funnier than mine. That's a funny story. I want to make people laugh. I'm going to adopt that story. Do I tell my story or do I tell it yours? Because it sounds better. Just a thought, because I've seen it and I've heard it plenty of times over the years. So more than most people, we lead a double life. He's very much the actor. Oops, now we're back to the actor. We said before we're going to talk about that actor back on page 61 and 62. Well, we're back to it again. To the outer world, he enjoys his stage character. This is the one he likes the fellows to see. More than that, and please highlight this sentence, this phrase, he wants to enjoy a certain reputation. We want to run the whole show. We want to not only control what goes on the stage, but we want to control your reactions to it. That's what enjoying a certain reputation is. It's controlling what your perceptions are of what it is I'm saying, doing, or trying to say or do, to get you to see and do things my way. Expert manipulators, Bill already told us, we could be the martyr, we could be the saint, we could be whatever we need to be to get our way. And when we don't get our way, what does Bill say we do? We double down. We try even harder. And when we still don't get our way, what do? We eat a little crow. I may be a little wrong, but you're more at fault. I'll take some, but not all of the responsibility. So he wants to enjoy a certain reputation, but knows in his heart he doesn't believe it. He doesn't believe it in his heart. The inconsistency is made worse by the things he does on his sprees. Coming to his senses, you may want to underline that or highlight that, and above it write, sobering up. Sobering up. He's revolted at certain episodes he vaguely remembers. He gets a visitor. He gets 4 visitors, the 4 horsemen. We get visited by the 4 horsemen. We come to our senses and we're revolted by those things, the things that the 4 horsemen tell us. And we vaguely remember. These memories are a nightmare. He trembles to think someone might have observed him. As fast as he can, he pushes these memories far inside himself. He hopes they will never see the light of day. Once again, iceberg honesty. We hope you'll never see the stuff below the surface. He is under constant fear and tension. And please underline fear and tension, because that makes for more drinking. Let me see. Yeah, let's go through another paragraph and we'll hang around a bit longer. Psychologists are inclined to agree with us. We have spent thousands of dollars for examinations. We know but few instances where we have given these doctors a fair break. We've seldom told them the whole truth. I didn't know what the whole truth was. And even if I did, telling you it means I've got to accept it and do something about it. And I don't know that I'm ready to do that. You know, we have lied to those people who are trying to help us. And that's what these psychiatrists and psychologists and parents and law enforcement people are doing. They're trying to help me. But what I would see as interference, they're trying to interfere with my self-will. And I hate opposition. I obstinately refuse to follow advice, whether it makes sense or not. I can't admit that you're right and I'm wrong. That's why I think one of the beauties of this book is that it's written in this non-judgmental manner. We are free to decide whether we want to follow the successful examples, not advice, not suggestions, examples of those who have come before us. You know, we come into even treatment centers get pretty damn tired of us because we come in desperate, shaking. Like, I'll do anything. Just tell me what to just make this end, please. I gotta feel better. You gotta help me do whatever. Tell me what to do. I'll do anything. I'll do anything. And 24, 48 hours later, it's, what do you mean I can't use the phone anytime I want to use the phone? What do you mean I can't go to my car and take a ride anytime? What do you mean I can't smoke my cigarettes anytime I want? Who are you to tell me what to do? And by the way, this place needs a good paint job. We start telling them how to run their establishment. No wonder why they can't stand us. We come in desperate, and 48 hours later, we turn into Benito Mussolini. Okay, getting back to the story. We've seldom told whole truth, nor have we followed their advice. Unwilling to be honest with these sympathetic men, we are honest with no one else. Can anyone identify with that? Anyone identify with that? Boy, oh boy. Small wonder many in the medical profession have a low opinion of alcoholics and their chances for recovery. I'm gonna stop there. There's way too much in the next paragraph to get into, because we're starting to talk about the who we're gonna talk about. So let's stop there on the bottom of page 7.